from New York, I'm Chris Hayes. Happy 4th of July. I hope you're enjoying it. We have a special 2-hour, supersized, super patriotic show for you tonight. Just before you joined us in the last half hour, President Donald Trump signed the big bill in the Oval Office. He calls it beautiful. The American people don't seem to agree. A bill that is so wildly unpopular, it screws many of the people who voted for Trump. And still, no one could really muster like a good actual affirmative account for it. It's going to cut Medicaid as it cut taxes for the rich. It's going to cut food aid like SNAP, while it throws billions of dollars at the Immigration, Customs and Enforcement. It's bad all around. It repeals all sorts of energy provisions that are key to the success we've had in building up the energy future. And because Donald Trump generally does actually have pretty good instincts on how to market things, the lipstick they've slapped on this pig is kind of funny. It ends up being the things that he came up with on the fly during the campaign. Remember there was that sort of period of time where he was doing like, you get a tax cut, you get a tax cut. Things that are, by the way, temporary and extremely limited. For example, the big one that he keeps talking about is no tax on tips. And that does sound kind of populist, although do we want to incentivize tips? No. But that's limited to a maximum deduction of $25,000 a year. And it abruptly cuts off at the end of 2028, just before Trump's term is over. It's a similar story with the no tax on overtime, which is capped at $12,500 a year. It also ends just 3.5 years from now. Meanwhile, you might be asking, well, I wonder if they're all temporary provisions in this bill. No, my dear. The New York Times points out the bill provides its most generous tax breaks early on and reserve some of its most painful benefit cuts until after the 2026 midterm elections. For example, the Medicaid work requirements that are going to kick a lot of people off Medicaid start in 2027. The cuts to Medicaid and food assistance are set to start in 2028, right as tips and overtime start getting taxed again. A lot of people, as much as 20 million people could lose their health care, up to 7 million people could lose their food assistance, including 2 million children. Everywhere you look, you can see that Republicans do kind of understand this is not a great bill. Regular voting Americans do too. Take a look at these 3 polls. They're all conducted around the same time last month, asking people if they support or they oppose the bill. Across the board, it's really consistent, pretty much 20 to 30 points underwater. Trump is certainly where people hate this bill, which is why he focuses on those small, temporary provisions that are literally just slivers of the entirety of this bill, right, which is trillions of dollars, that sound much more populist than what the bill actually is. They're tiny percentages and very limited, and he gets this, which is why at the signing today, an event that would normally be all about the actual landmark legislation he's signing, he basically said, look over there, making news by inviting the bomber pilots who conducted the strikes on Iran rather than having the main focus be on the big bill. I should tell you, it's unclear if those pilots were even able to attend due to security concerns. There was a flyover by a B-2 bomber and airmen from Whiteman Air Force Base. Those families were in attendance. Again, all this is happening because Donald Trump and the Republican Party know that the less people pay attention to the actual bill, the better it is. Fernando Mondi is a Democratic strategist and pollster. Charlie Dent's former Republican congressman of Pennsylvania. Donna Edwards serves as Democratic Congresswoman of Maryland. And they join me now. Fernand, what's your read on the politics of this moment? There's been all this sort of, all these pieces I've been saying about like Donald Trump's on a winning streak and he bombed Iran and a war did not start. And I mean, we'll see about that. He won at the Supreme Court on these major questions and now passed his big legislation. And I look at what Americans seem to be saying about all this and they don't seem to be that enthused. What do you think?
Well, according to the polls, Chris, which is my trade, they're certainly not enthused. Donald Trump is still underwater from a favorability perspective. You just gave the numbers earlier on this big bill, which are deeply underwater. But I think you got to look at it for what it is. Donald Trump is on a massive winning streak. He promised American carnage when he took office for the first time in 2017. And that is what this bill delivers. And it really is big and beautiful if you're sitting in the Kremlin, because you're seeing the catastrophic damage that this is going to cause American citizens once the effects start to take effect in the years to come. But I think, Chris, the most disturbing thing about the implications of this is it seems to be a Republican Party and certainly a Trump administration that is somewhat unconcerned about the unpopularity of this, because if you follow the law of politics in a democracy, public opinion is an important barometer because you always expect there will be a backlash. And knowing going into this bill how unpopular it is, how some of these elements would devastate even the Trump base, the really tricky and troubling question I think Americans have to ask themselves is, why is this administration going so headfirst into something that they know is so deeply unpopular and that targets their base? And I think a legitimate question is because there may not need to be the type of elections that we've been accustomed to for 249 years when the midterms come.
Charlie, my reading of the logic of a bill like this, right, is you've got these expiring tax cut provisions. The Republican Party is going to want to extend a lot of those. But there was this moment that I thought was so interesting. It was about, I want to say 4 to 6 weeks back, where they're trying to make the math work, right? You got to cut Medicaid to claw back some of that money that's the cost of the tax cuts, which you're still going to blow up the deficit. So I don't even really understand, like, what the tipping point is, to be honest. But there was some discussion about, well, maybe we can tax rich people a little more. Trump said it. I think that would be fine. Steve Bannon said maybe we could do this. And then there's like the kibosh got put on it so fast. And I wonder, as someone who served as a Republican congressman, like, there are so few people who pay the estate tax. You could have just let that provision expire. Like, why doesn't that ever happen?
Well, there are a couple things here. I often thought that a smarter strategy might have been for Republicans to do what they did in 2013 after President Obama was reelected and we had a Republican House and we had to deal with the expiration of the Bush tax cuts. And we ended up doing extending all of them except for those earning over $400,000 and $450,000 if you're a married couple. That's what we did. You know, the world didn't come to an end. Many Democrats supported it. And I thought that might be a smart strategy here because, as you just pointed out, you know, extending the 2017 tax cuts is one thing. That's the whole purpose of this exercise. But if you're going to add reductions to medical assistance, to food assistance, programs that largely serve those on the lower end of the income scale, tax cuts tend to skew higher to the people on the higher end of the income scale. You created a toxic political mix. So if you would have allowed the highest income tax rates to go from 37 to 39.6%, you could maybe take an argument away from the Democrats. And you could also maybe put the carried interest loophole too. There are a couple of things they could have done a little bit more populist, but they chose not to. And I mean, Tom Tillis and I think Brian Fitzpatrick kind of screamed from the rooftops about, you know, the political damage that this bill is going to do to the party in the upcoming midterm.
Yeah, there's something so perfect about the kind of, I called it lipstick on the pig in the intro, but just the sort of strange contradictions of the heart of this sort of MAGA moment, Donna, where it's like Trump does have sort of more, I think, rhetorically populist instincts on this stuff. Like, he kind of gets the no tax on overtime, no tax on tips, social, like, those sound good. They sound a lot better than we're going to cut taxes for like super rich people. And yet it's the same stuff at the core. Like, I'm so struck by how this bill does what kind of big domestic policy Republican bills have been doing for most of the time I've covered politics, which is cutting taxes. They're skewed towards the top and cutting some social services or health care or something like that to pay for them.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that Republicans are counting on the fact that maybe Americans won't pay attention to what's in the bill, but clearly that's not the case. And I think you could hear that when Leader Hakeem Jeffries was on the floor for his marathon 1 minute, really describing in great detail what was in the bill and who would be hurt. And despite Republicans delaying some of the provisions that will hurt the most, the loss of health care, the cuts to nutrition programs, the college cuts, those things that Democrats are still going to have a lot to chew on in this bill to describe to the American people. And it's unpopular now. It will become more unpopular as we get closer to the midterms.
So yesterday, Trump was in Iowa, and it was the first time I saw him try to make a run at the why a state's more than $15 million should not be taxed. And he used this argument I've seen before, which is like it's the family farms. By the way, I was just a few days ago out with some family farmers. The idea that you have a $15 million farm, like there are so few of those in this country if you're actually doing family farming. But here's Donald Trump giving his number of how many of these farms are going to be saved from the death tax in Iowa. I want you to listen very carefully to the number here.
ज़्यादा मोबाइल बटावने में भी की में आना भाई ये खर्चा सादा आगे चंगा बला
अगराने को कुल्फा खवाया 100 रुपए दा
ठीक है
गिना दिते
पिच
नींबू दा छापर भर दिता
हाँ नींबू जिल्लू यार जिल्लू एक बड़ा जिल्लू
हाँ इतना खड़ा जो निहाद कहना
ना नींबू दरे इन्हें रस है ये तो दे रस
बेहतरीन हाँ
हाँ
खट्टी बड़ी हाँ
किसी सादा कर ले फारे ना हाँ
ले आखे
जिले असां तो जुलदे हैं हुन तू कर गए दीगर दे बाद दीगर दा करना किन से काम कोई को
सवेरे बजे तेल ठड्डा दी
मेरी कहीं नहीं तुम्हारी कहीं नहीं कसम बस इतवारी सा को आधा किलो शापर दे ए मैं गांव को देने मसला है
आधा किलो वाला शापर दे ये अदराने को किलो वाला भर
मैं को किलो वाला भर दे ओने मैं गांव दा ओ यार एक थण वदे वो यम ते को बेचने में
बंदा शक्ति में शोकता
हां
लेकिन ये थाने मरे लगा
बड़ा निको निकाल
निपू दी सोर काई नहीं
यार आधे जो हैं लोग
भला उन बंदे के पुष्प एक थान से छोटा है
हां
या बड़ी है
सोच दी वजह
छोटा है कौन दे बोला वो छोटा थे उसे नहीं वो सोच दी वजह करे कोई सोच हर बा मन तू का बिना ना पर ले कर दसेगा तो पैसा
तो कोई नहीं दसेने
हां इल्म होसी
या उन्हें कोई तरीका उन्हें आप दिता हो सी उठिया हो सी
हां कोई हर बा होसी उन्हें करे मत अरे तेरे छोटे लोग छोटे थे
यार हुन तेरी ए डिबू लाड़वे ने सा डिबू लाड़वे ने हुन असा टीका लेने ओ जो छुट दे ना ए तो काई हुन इडोली ना छोटी थई भी ने इडोली अंगल छोटी थई भी ने हां
जी हालत में ना सोचती में जाए तो आगे भी ठीक थी या वो छोटा थिया होने हैं छोटा थिया है या
अबे थे कुदरती थे हुने थे हूण थे और जमांदरू ना हा हूण थे हफ्ते 15 जरे जरूर दीवार राखी में
यार समझी गया
थोड़े ज्यादा है नहीं किदो नींबू लोन खा ले तो किदो है ना
ये पोल जो टब दे सजा होंगी
ठीक है
बहुत वाला फार्म कने
ठीक है अच्छा
ओ नींबू तो ये नाम भी उठाइए
हां नींबू आम पेंड
उठाइए ये तो सा
बनेरा ठीक हां ये बना ले बहुत है बाग
सजाई पायो
घा मारा
सादा बजे दीगार जुलदे पे टाइम कट जा मोटरसाइकिल दे ना हूं काम करे अपना काम करे ठड्डा टाइम जरे थी निमाशा को पहले आधा घंटा
या बस्सी कर दी है बंदा नजर आवे दुकान से
हां वो नींबू
नींबू बैठ है लेकिन ऐसा ही से जो फारेगा
नींबू एक तरह ठीक
और डेली बेस क्या है 10 रुपए तू दे 10 रुपए मैं देवा नींबू अपने पानी ठड्डा तेरा अपना है
हां खंड
सिर्फ 30 रुपए की खंड 10 रुपए आंदन फे 10 रुपए फायदा देखो साथ जरे हुन निमको पापड़ खा बने 100 रुपए दे 50 दे
निमको पापड़ दाई नुकसान
हैं
या डब्बे हुआ पाए किलो खंडा गन के पिया रहा था
ई नहीं थी ना कमा से पिया कभी जाते विनन लुगाई पिया रहे थे डाढे इन छा बात है
बोतल खाली पड़ी बोतल तुम्हारे पानी
4 मिनट जी बहु कहीं नहीं हाजी 5 मिनट जी हो अगर व्यूज आवे 6 मिनट जी व्यू ड्यूरेशन दे 5.5 मिनट जी 4 मिनट जी होंदे हाजी होंदे मेरे व्यूज आए हैं 4-5 मिनट की फिर हाँ वीडियो डिलीट कर सकते
क्यों
यार इदो 4 मिनट की वीडियो उदो 6 मिनट की ड्यूरेशन है लोड मर सकता यूट्यूब देखा हुआ गया वीडियो जो 4 मिनट की सटी पे इन व्यू ड्यूरेशन 6 मिनट का आंदा खड़े हाँ भी जैसे यूट्यूब चाहे सोचे सी ना कोई